Alright, today we're going to be replacing the front hub bearing assembly on my 2014 GMC Sierra. Now keep in mind that the process I go through is going to be the same or similar on a lot of other vehicles, barring the torque specs and possibly the wrench sizes, but the process is going to be basically the same. So go ahead and watch the video. Even if you don't have a GM, it may help you out, okay? I want to say a quick thank you to everyone who takes the time to hit that subscribe button, everyone who gives me those thumbs ups, and people who leave questions or comments down below. That's what really keeps me going. Let's go ahead and get started on the Sierra. .22mm on the lug nuts. Alright, we're going to start by removing this dust cover here. Just basically take a small straight screwdriver and a hammer and gently try to get it started. You can see that it's starting to separate already. It protects the hub nut, okay? Okay, so at this point I'm going to take a chisel and just kind of wedge it into the cooling fins between the two discs on your rotor. Okay, and kind of wedge it up against the brake caliper. Now we're going to have to remove this hub nut. This one is a 35mm, and I'm going to use an impact wrench to remove it, not to install it. But if you don't have an impact wrench, you can certainly use a ratchet and an extremely long bar. Cheater bar, I guess is what they call them. I always call mine Old Faithful. But this thing should be torqued down to something like 188 foot-pounds of torque. I'll double check it when we install it, but it's going to be on there pretty good. So if you have an impact option, you might want to use it. I always try to use tools that people most commonly would have, but in this case, I'm going to cheat and use my impact wrench. Alright, so at this point we're going to remove the brake caliper. Okay, we're going to remove the brake caliper bracket bolts. Not these pin bolts here, but these 18mm bolts on the back. There's one there. And see if I can get my finger on the other one. There's one there, okay? Alright, again, these are 18mm, and they're apt to be on there pretty good. You can use a pipe or a fairly long ratchet, breaker bar, something like that. Make sure the socket's on squarely and heave on it. Alright, now we have a T30 Torx here that attaches this rotor to the brake hub assembly, so we need to remove that. And I'm about 50-50 on these things recently. I've been breaking them about half the time and getting them removed about half the time. This is a shout out to Devin. He hates these things as much as I do. And I think it went. We did. We got it. Now, if I put this thing back on, Devin, you can yell and swear at me. Okay? And because it came out so easily, we will put it back on. Okay, these power stop rotors look pretty good. I'm going to reuse these, but obviously if you needed rotors and brakes, now's the time to do it because all of this has to come off anyways, right? Alright, next we need to remove this ABS sensor wire. It runs from here at the hub assembly all the way back into here, and there's a connection point back here. I'll try to get that on camera when we actually disconnect it. Now the Moog bearing assemblies that I purchased actually include the clips, so I don't have to be too awful careful here. I just need to get them out of here. If you purchased different hub assemblies, they may not have the clips, so you have to be a little more careful than I just was. Okay, you can see how that one is. It just kind of pushes down into a slot here. Okay, so as I follow the ABS sensor back, we end up here. And this also pushes down into a little bracket here with little plastic clips. So I'm just going to pry those out because, again, the bearing assemblies that I purchased include them. Alright, here's a better shot, I hope, anyways, of the actual connector. You can see there's a little red clip there, and that actually kind of pulls away from the connection spot. And it may have some dust in it, which it seems to. There it goes. So you can see how that lifts up like that. Now we can take a small flat screwdriver and kind of lift up like that, and it releases it. Alright, so now we have three 15mm bolts we have to remove. Okay, right here, one at the very top and one on the other side back here. And then we can actually see the other end of them right here. So we're going to hit those with a little bit of penetrating fluid right now, and then we'll let it set for just a second. And right there. Okay. Alright, before we start removing those bolts, I want to tap on this gently. You can either use a block of wood or a punch. Okay, you obviously don't want to mess up the threads. And also try to do is we're trying to look for movement, okay? And while that's happening, we might as well get that washer. Okay, so actually that's free. That's all we're looking for. Alright, I probably won't show you all three of these, but I want to show why you need a small extension here. It's so tight in there next to the axle that the head of the ratchet won't fit. Okay, possibly a 3/8 would, but these are on there pretty good. Now I am going to just back them out a little bit, and I'll show you why here in a minute. It's going to help me get the bearing out. Okay, that's all I'm going to do on each of the 3 bolts for now, okay? And I'll show you why in a minute. Let me get them all to that point where they're all backed out just a little bit. Alright, so at this point, if you removed your bolts completely, you could start hitting on this part here with a hammer. You want to be careful not to hit your dust shield. You don't want to tear your CV boot. So what I'm going to do, because I have an air hammer and this sort of hammer bit here, is I'm just going to come in behind those bolts where I backed them out just a little bit. And that's going to wiggle this loose a lot easier, and in my opinion safer. I don't have to worry about hitting something else with a hammer, okay, like my thumb for example. Okay, let's see if I can get a shot of that real quick. Not my thumb, but the bolts. Alright, let me see if I can get a shot of this here real quick for you. The 2 side ones are easy to get to, the top one not so much, but really if you hit the 2 side ones it should just come free, okay? And I'm just going to put it right on here. Plug your ears. Alright, if you're having a hard time getting the bolts out, you may have to push this in a little bit just to slide the bolts out by the axle, okay? Alright, at this point we can remove the old hub assembly, okay? Pay attention to which direction the dust shield goes in, and obviously if this is in rough shape, now's a good time to replace it. What we'll do is I'm going to paint this because it might make it last a little longer. It's quite rusty now, but I'm just going to spray it down with some rust inhibitor paint. Let it dry, and while it's drying, we'll take a look at the old bearing compared to the new bearing, okay? Alright, you can see on this Moog hub bearing assembly, includes the, obviously the ABS sensor and the wire, but also the clips that connect the wire as it feeds up through, okay? Now I've used Detroit Axle and Delco and other hub bearing assemblies, and I'll be honest with you, they're all fine at first. Typically anyways, as long as they're installed correctly. But I think I've had really good luck with Moog in terms of longevity, okay? So when possible, I buy this, but I am going to link to this part as well as some less expensive options down below for the Sierra. Now on this one here, I'm going to try to see if I can give you a, see if I can get you to hear it. Now I don't know if you can hear that or not, but it is actually making noise. Now imagine the weight of the vehicle traveling down the interstate at you know, 75, 80 miles an hour, and it's actually noisy, and I can hear it, so I wanted to replace it. Okay, you want to put a little bit of grease on the splines here, and I'm just going to wipe a thin layer of grease around the edge of this steering knuckle here, just where the hub assembly sits in, okay? And while you're right here, you might as well hit your tie rod end. And if your ball joints have grease zerks, I would hit those also. We'll be doing ball joints on this thing here not too long, I'm pretty sure. And I'll probably use Moog. And give it a couple pumps here. Watch for leaks. Okay, let's get it back together. Alright, the dust shield's not quite dry, but that's okay. We'll put it back together anyways, just paint. Okay, so what I've got is the sensor wire pulled through the dust shield in this little cutout. Okay, and what we're going to do is sort of line it up the same way it came out. You've got to get the splines into the bearing. Okay, just like that. Alright, what we'll do is take one of the bolts, probably the top one, it's going to be the easiest to see. Try try to get it started by hand. And to get the bolt in, you may have to push this axle in just a little bit to slide it in. Okay. Alright, so I'm going to get these ratchet tight, and then we're going to torque them down to 133 foot-pounds, okay? And I've been kind of going around, kind of the way you tighten up lug nuts, you know? So you don't just wind one in all the way. Wind one in until you start to feel it get a little tense, and then you move around to the other side, and then do the top. Alright, let's get our rotor back in place. We're going to line our spot up here with a threaded spot on the hub. Devin, I can hear you cursing my name right now. T30 Torx. And I just wind it in a little bit. We're not going to tighten it down crazy. We just want to make sure that it's in there and that the rotor is sitting flush against the hub. Alright, before we mount the caliper here, you'll want to inspect your pads. Obviously, now's a good time to replace those if they need to be replaced. You also want to inspect to make sure that you have free movement here on your caliper pins, which I do. Okay, make sure your boots aren't torn or anything like that. Now, we haven't added any thickness to the rotor or to the pads, so this should slide on. It might be a little tight, so if you get it started, kind of wiggle it back and forth, and you may be able to also just take your thumbs, and hopefully you can see this, kind of push that caliper piston back just a little bit. That's all it's going to need. Then make sure your pads are in there straight as well. Okay, just like that. Gentle love tap here. Just like that. And we'll get one started finger here. Alright. These caliper bracket bolts get torqued down to like 170. So, get the other one. You always want to start these by hand before you hit them with a ratchet, so you make sure that you're not cross-threading and stripping anything out. And we'll get them ratchet tight, and then we'll torque them down. Okay, 170 foot-pounds on these. Okay, let's run our ABS line here. This goes in here like that. Sits down in here like this. Okay, so the side with a little notch on it like that goes on the side with the red clip. Hopefully you can see it. And then once it's in and you feel it snap, then you push that red clip down like that, and then we'll put these two plastic tabs back in place. Alright, so we're going to replace our washer here, and then your hub nut, and they do recommend replacing this anytime it's been removed, okay, because it is sort of a locking type nut. And we're going to need our chisel, or you can use a screwdriver. I'm just using a chisel. I think it's a little bit more rigid, and it actually fits in between those cooling fins just right. It doesn't fall out. Usually, it'll probably fall out now because I just said that, but alright, we're going to get it tightened up by hand here. Then we're going to tighten this down. I think it's 188, but I'll double check it here. So hopefully this video has been helpful. Give me that thumbs up if you did find it helpful. And as I mentioned in the intro, I appreciate everyone who takes the time to leave questions and comments and feedback. Positive and negative. Constructive criticism is good. Troll-like behavior is not so good. But and then again, if you want to see more of this type of stuff, hit that subscribe button. It really helps me out, and it keeps me going, and YouTube likes it, and I like it, so good stuff. Alright, let's get the torque wrench. Okay, make sure it's on there good. It's going to be a lot of torque on here. Alright, thanks for watching. Have fun. Give me that thumbs up and hit subscribe.